Do you want to learn how to turn your photos from this into this? Hi, my name is Oyun Orka, a VTuber who tries to draw, and I often get asked on how to draw backgrounds. Lighting and backgrounds are my favorite parts of the drawing process, but it's actually thanks to using lots of photo references and blending modes that I'm able to enjoy it so much. So for today, let's talk about 3 ways you can use photos that you take for easier and simple backgrounds. So for this video, I'll be using these 3 photos that I took to demonstrate my 3 methods. If you want to follow along using your own characters with my exact same photos, I've also linked them in the description down below. So firstly, let's talk about drawing over a photo directly. So I've done this a couple times before, including to show off some trip photos when I went on a family vacation. Drawing your character over a photo directly is a fun and easy way to add a background without having to learn much of the background basics such as perspective and detailed lighting yourself. Though if you don't add any additional lighting to your character, it might look a little bit out of place. So for this tutorial, I'll talk about ways you can understand where the light is coming from so you can better blend your character into the photos that you took. Now let's start with our first photo. So I took this photo because I really liked how the sunlight was kind of shining on the left side of the picture and most of the trees in sort of the foreground being more darker. Finally, the sun in the very background is kind of lighting up the mountains and the blue sky, so this scene really stood out to me. Now let's sketch our character in this photo. I'll start by lowering the opacity of the photo itself, and then sketching the character. Lowering the opacity of the photo itself before getting to sketching helps me to focus on what I'm actually drawing right now and putting on the canvas, instead of being distracted by what's already on the canvas. Usually when I draw, I actually draw the character first and then the background, but when working with photos, if you're drawing over a photo and planning to use it as a background, then you already have the background pretty much completed. You'll know where everything is, and you can draw the character in accordance to where things in the background are. Now I'll go ahead and finish the character drawing without much commentary, since this tutorial is mostly about how to draw characters over photo backgrounds. However, if you'd like a more detailed video on how I draw characters, then feel free to let me know in a comment below. So now that we've finished drawing the character, we can think about blocking and lighting. So before getting into rendering and trying to blend the character into the background immediately, I like to first block out some colors just to understand where the light is actually coming from. So here, instead of guessing, you can kind of look at the background to give you hints on where the light is coming from and where it's casting shadows. So you see over here on this branch, which I can highlight in red, here the branch is casting a shadow onto the rocks over here. So with this information, we can kind of identify that the light is coming from a little bit from the top right-hand corner. This is also accurate when we look at the branches over here and the pine needles over here, and notice that the top part of the needles are being lit up while the bottom is dark. So keeping that in mind, we can also see that there's some light shining just on this spot, kind of on the character and onto the background. So this part should pretty much be lit up. But there is something blocking part of this fallen log, which should cover part of the hand over here, and then also there will be a shadow cast from the character onto part of the background here as well. So keeping all of that in mind, we can start blocking in the colors. So whenever I'm trying to color pick for backgrounds and trying to blend characters in the backgrounds, I try to look at the predominant color of the background and reflect that onto the character. So here I notice that I can use this fallen log kind of as color reference and block in some colors. Set this layer to multiply, and from there I can quickly create some shadows. Now even though the shadows are cool toned with the blue sky kind of reflecting into the shadows, you'll notice that the lighting is very warm and orange toned because of the sunlight. So I can reflect that by picking a warm color from the background and adjusting this slightly, doing a clipping mask over the character, and setting this to overlay. Also, since the sun looks like it's on its way to setting, this means that it's later in the time of day. So I'll also adjust the multiply layer and add an orange undertone. Now I'll also block in the general shade of the character, casting the shadow onto the background itself. So the hand is kind of on the log here, so I'll add in some shadows here, so it looks like the character is actually interacting with the background, instead of just being kind of slapped onto the background. I'll also add the cast shadow from the character itself onto parts of this undergrowth here. This doesn't need to look perfect at this stage since we're just blocking it in, and we can refine this soon. Now that I've blocked in the colors for general shading, I'll now go in and render and finish it, keeping in mind that the lighting is coming mostly from the top right-hand corner. Now that we've pretty much finished rendering the character, there's still a couple of corrections I'd like to make to further blend the character into the background and add a little bit of extra lighting. First, you'll notice that since I drew this on top of the background, some parts are not completely blending in. For example, over here you can see the legs kind of cut off the log. To fix that, I'll simply paint over it. I'll color pick parts from the log and just roughly block in some color. Since most drawings will be viewed by other people from a distance, it doesn't matter if this doesn't look that perfect as long as the impression is good overall. Now that that's added, something that I usually like to do to make sure that the color contrast is good overall is make a new raster layer, fill the entire thing to black, and then set the blending mode to saturation. By decreasing the saturation and making this a new layer, I can quickly check what are the darkest and lightest parts of this drawing. I try to make the focus point of a drawing around where the character is. So here you can see around the head, it's a little bit messy and the color contrast isn't very high. To fix that, I'll go ahead and make another new layer, and behind the character but over the photo background, I'll go ahead and color pick the sky and add in just a little bit of highlights around where the character is. So a quick fix I like to use to make my colors a little bit more cohesive in illustrations is to make a new overlay layer and color pick some predominant colors from the backgrounds and apply that to the character. So here you can see that now that I've finished my overlay layer, I've pulled some of the cool and darker colors and applied that using just an airbrush over where I want there to be less focus from the viewer. Where the sun is shining and where I want more viewer focus, you can see that I've used an orange airbrush to kind of block in where the sun is shining. I also use a lighter airbrush over here in this section just for a little bit of ambient light. So now when I set this back to overlay, you can see that it brings out some of the more cool tones of the background and warm tones on the character. And now when you click the saturation and hide and unhide the overlay layer, you can see that the contrast changes and there's a higher level of contrast around where the character is, which is what I'm going for. And after adding some layer effects, such as noise, gradient map, and RGB shift, we're done. So now we've finished our first example of using photos for backgrounds. By drawing your character over your photo directly, while color picking and referencing shadows and light from the photo itself, you get a pretty good result without too much effort. But what if you don't want to use the photo directly and would prefer the background to be drawn more in your own art style? Well, you can still use photos as reference by repainting the photo itself. So there's two ways you can technically repaint. You could just repaint over the photo directly by lowering the opacity and essentially painting over the photo itself. But the way I personally like to do this is repaint the photo on a new canvas. Here I used a photo I took several years ago on a family road trip as reference for a background. So here you can see the photo I reference actually can't be painted over very easily, since the reflection of my family's car audio system was reflected onto the window. But I was still able to color pick from the photo and use it as reference, while also learning more about color and shadow through repainting the entire thing on a separate canvas. A lot of artists like to do this through photo studies as well. So essentially, the benefits of repainting or photo studies is that you'll be able to learn how to draw something with a direct reference. This is super helpful because it takes the guesswork out of drawing a background from imagination, while also still getting in practice yourself and improving as an artist. You can also make any changes to the background while repainting the photo, and maybe most importantly, you can blend it with your characters through your own art style. So here, I have a photo that I really like the colors of. I especially like how the clouds look here, and the sunlight shining on the water. I especially like how the clouds look here, and the sunset setting over water. However, because I took this photo on a public dock on a busy summer evening, there was a lot of people here, and I also had to blur out some people to protect their privacy. Because I obviously can't use this photo directly, I'll instead use this photo as reference to take some guesswork out of drawing. This is actually how I approach most of my personal drawings. I'll typically have a sketch where I just doodle and think about background later. Usually after I finish a sketch, I'll start looking for photo references or use my own photos as a reference. So this is pretty typical for a drawing that I'll do for fun. Now, like last time, I'll go ahead and draw the character without much commentary. So now that we finished the character base, I'm going to go ahead and start drawing the background. Using the photo as reference, essentially I'm doing a photo study of the photo for the background and applying that to the illustration. I've also added a couple of ropes to the drawing just for a little bit of props and adds another element of interest to the drawing. For this drawing, I decided to change a couple of aspects of the photo in the final drawing. For example, after playing around a little bit with the look of mountains in the background, I decided to remove it so that it looks like it's on the open ocean. Using a painterly brush, I go ahead and try to draw in parts of the waves. Even though the sun is more in the center of the photo, I've decided to move it a little bit to the right, just so it peeks through the ropes a little bit. When doing photo studies for backgrounds, it's nice to look at the photo and be able to learn how light actually works. For example, even though the sun is over here, it reflects sunlight onto this cloud, but not this cloud. The reason why is because of cloud layering. You can assume that the darker clouds are closer to the earth, so the sun isn't quite shining on it, whereas the clouds that are being more lit up by the sunshine are further up in the sky. This might be better to visualize with some sort of a diagram. So say the sun is over here, the earth is here, and this cloud is up here. So even though from above you might see this being lit up, because the viewer, let's say the viewer is here, the viewer actually can't see the sunlight shining on this cloud. Whereas this cloud is probably a little bit higher up, so that some of it is being lit up by the sunshine and then bouncing back over to the viewer's eyes. Meanwhile, the clouds way up here are being lit up by the sunshine because it bounces light up here and then back down to the viewer. So doing these kinds of photo studies helps you get a better understanding of how light works just through practice. Even if you don't completely understand it, because neither do I honestly, it's fun to experiment with backgrounds using photo references. It's a great opportunity to learn. I'll also add a couple of reflections on the water from the sunlight, and a couple more details, and we're done. And with that, we finish our second example of using photos for backgrounds. By essentially doing a photo study of a photo you took, you can not only draw a background pretty quickly and easily with a direct reference, you can also learn by practicing drawing from real life. But what if the background you're envisioning doesn't exactly quite exist? Or maybe you can't find a photo of the exact scene you want? Well, that brings us to our final part, which is using various photos as references for the things that you're drawing. I do this a lot for commission works, where I'll find a lot of photos of something that I want to draw, compile it onto a separate canvas, and then essentially combine elements of those different photos together. Due to copyright reasons, I can't actually show the photos I use as reference for commission work. But in this example, using a colored sketch I did, I used two photos that I took where I liked the sky and clouds in one photo, but the water better in another, and referenced both images to get the background that I wanted. So by using a lot of photo references, this helps when you maybe already have a specific scene or composition in mind. You can use photos to better combine things for your backgrounds while also learning from realities. It's essentially doing lots of photo studies, where you're not exactly drawing it directly from the photo, but combining a lot of things and creating a scene that doesn't actually exist, which adds a personal touch. So for this example, I'm using a sketch that I drew previously. It's an underwater diving scene with maybe some coral or seaweed on the side. This is pretty typical for my drawing process, where I'll usually sketch something based on what I have in mind, then do grayscale shading, and then look for photo references. So here, I'm using photos that I took at an aquarium with an underwater tunnel, which has some of the lighting and angles that I want. The photos itself aren't very great, but it works as reference. So here, you can see that on the side I've put all the photo references that I plan to use, and beneath it is my references. So first, I'll go ahead and, like the previous times, draw the character without much commentary. So now that I've finished drawing the character, it's time to think about the background. I'll go ahead and block in some colors based on the photo references. I kind of want to make sure that the light is kind of shining from above the surface of the water and there's some light shining down. When drawing underwater scenes from a very low angle, kind of like this, where you can kind of see the light shining over the surface of the water, it's nice to go in and make a new layer and block in a sort of ovular shape of where you want the light to be coming down from. After that, you can use any sort of painterly brush, kind of block in the water ripples. You can also set the brush to erase transparent to take away from it. I'm also referencing some of the photos that I took on the side from the aquarium. So now that I finished blocking in the colors for this, you can see that since it's on a new layer, I can lock the transparent pixels and then go ahead and add some airbrush effects. I want the light to be a little bit dimmer on the edges of this circle and a little bit brighter towards the center where the sun is kind of shining down. Next, I'll go above the layer of the water but below the layer that we just made of the kind of blob. Go ahead and use some more airbrush to kind of have the water go from light to dark. I also kind of want the light to be shining down, and I'll color pick this blob again and make these strokes of sunlight kind of shining down from this light source. Then I'll go ahead and use the airbrush to darken some parts of this. For the sunlight, I can go ahead and add some random blobs if I want to follow this directly, but I also might experiment with what it looks like otherwise. Now, based off of the photos, I'd like to add some props. So here in the photo, you can see that as things get further away from the area that light is shining on, it's a little bit darker. So I'll go ahead and block in some random maybe rocks and other things in this dark area beneath the character. Now, maybe closer to the character in the foreground, I'll add some more rocks based off of these rocks over here in this photo. If I want to add seaweed, I'll go ahead and color pick the green from this sort of moss that's growing on the rock here and apply that to the drawing. I experiment with adding some sand on a seabed based on the references too. This way, there will be a little bit of bounce lighting on the character itself instead of just being lit only on the back. Since I think the angle is a little bit off, I decided to actually remove the seabed for now. Now, even though I'm not adding the seabed, I'm still adding a little bit of bounce light from an imaginary seabed that the viewer can't see onto the character, just to add a little bit of lighting. I'm going to experiment a little bit more with lighting. I won't go too into depth on how I shade lighting in this video, but if you'd like a more in-depth video on how I do underwater scenes, feel free to let me know in a comment below. Now, I'll go ahead and add an overlay layer and some extra effects and pretty much finish it up. And now, we've completed our final example of using photos for backgrounds. By looking at a lot of photo references and combining aspects you like, you can make any imagined scene a reality. So with the methods we talked about, we were able to turn these photos into these illustrations. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you give this video a like, and subscribe if you'd like to see more from my channel. If you have questions or would like me to cover a specific topic next, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!